Hi friends, my name is Maggie and welcome to my first making of cosplay video on this channel. Triss Merigold was a dream cosplay of mine, and after years and years of putting her off, I finally felt confident enough to start making her alternative design from The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. I've been doing cosplay for over 3 years now, and while doing photo shoots is great because you have a pretty picture that you can show to everyone online, it doesn't really show you the behind the scenes and all the months that go into a cosplay project like this. So I wanted to try new ways of documenting my work and kind of step outside my comfort zone, hence this first dive into YouTube videos. This cosplay had a lot of first times for me. One of them obviously being first time filming the entire process. And not gonna lie, I probably should have chosen something smaller for my first YouTube video, because I've made so much mistakes along the way, including filming too much or filming too little, using my phone to record or skipping entire steps because I just forgot or was on a deadline. But at least I've learned a lot along the way and hopefully the next videos will be more polished. So this is not strictly a tutorial, rather a general walkthrough that shows you my pipeline and like overall techniques, rather than getting into details of, for example, how to make a duct tape pattern or how to do 3D modeling, because there are already tons of tutorials done by experts on these topics, and I think there's no need to get into that. Hopefully you can learn something from this video anyway, and if you use it to make the exact same cosplay or for some other project, then please send me some photos or tag me. I'd love to see your work. Okay, without further ado, let's get into the build. So I started off by gathering some references. As you can see, it's very, very important to know your source material thoroughly. So I basically played The Witcher 3 for the second time after many years, which was an awesome experience. But also I had the intention of making Triss in mind, so as I was playing I was doing lots and lots of screenshots from every possible angle of her, so I could have some good references for my cosplay. I started off by making a mock-up. I just traced some pieces on some scrap fabric and just kept modifying them until I was happy with the shape. After I had a satisfying result, I started thinking about the fabric, which was a whole pain in the butt. I had so much trouble finding the right color and pattern, so I decided to just dye some jacquard, cotton and polyester blend. I used my washing machine for this, which was the easiest option for me, since I live in a tiny apartment without a balcony. The dyeing turned out great, as you can see here, and I could start tracing my pattern pieces onto the fabric. Most of this was done on the floor because the skirt panels were huge. I couldn't fit them all on my table. Luckily some of the pieces did, so whenever I could I used my table for tracing. So here I am tracing the bodice, which consisted of just 4 pieces, 2 for the front and 2 for the back. And then finally I could start cutting into my fabric. I just love this moment when you have all your patterns figured out and you can just brainlessly start cutting into your beautiful fabric. I came back to the floor for this process because, well, the skirt was huge. Whenever I could, I used my circular knife. I don't know, I just prefer it over scissors because scissors give me blisters and you can get a much smoother cut with it. It can get a bit tricky around the curves, but with some practice you can get some really good results. And yeah, after all my pattern pieces were cut out, I went to lining the sleeves with this red satin fabric. I'm sorry that the color changes from shot to shot basically. That's just the magical properties of this fabric. So I traced this piece onto the red, right sides facing each other, then sewed them together and flipped them over. In the meantime I decided to add lining to my bodice as well, so as you can see this was a huge jumble of red and turquoise that was really hard to figure out. But in the end it was so worth it. It looks all fancy on the inside and clean. The skirt pieces were much easier to figure out because it was basically just long straight lines. And at last my base dress was done. I could finally go to the fun parts, which didn't require as much figuring out. For the gold lines on the hem of her dress, I used this gold embroidery thread. Before jumping into my actual piece, I did some tests on some scraps, and I really like the effect that this middle leaf has. So to achieve that look, I used this fluffy material called batting. I just cut out long strips of it without being very precise, because most of it would be cut out later. To mark where the stripes would go, I used a long piece of yarn and adjusted the curve very easily by moving it until it had the shape that I wanted and was symmetrical on both sides. I find that this way was much easier than drawing the lines with chalk, because with yarn I can just pull and move to achieve the shape that I want, rather than erasing little bits and drawing over it and having it a mess. When I was happy with the shape I had, I glued them into place with pieces of tape. Then I traced some straight lines with my circular knife on this gold pleather. Then I could finally start sewing the stripes. I sandwiched the fluffy batting between a layer of my turquoise jacquard and the gold pleather, and just used a straight stitch to sew it as close to the edge of the gold stripe as possible. And then I sewed over the edge with a zigzag stitch, watching to catch both the gold pleather part as well as the jacquard. This would hide my edge as well as the batting and make a nice clean finish. And here's all the stripes and hems finished. I also did the back, which has a V shape. I laid out the dress flat on my floor, then placed some pattern paper on top of it and cut it out so that it would cover the area that the vines were supposed to be on, and drew the pattern straight on that. All the while I had my reference open on a laptop, so I could do it as close to the original as possible. After I had all my pieces ready, I cut them up into 4 segments and started cutting it out with my trusty X-Acto knife. Luckily I could do this on my workshop table, because if I had to do it on the floor, boy, my back would not be grateful. Yeah, here's how it would look like. Last chance to do some adjustments. Then I laid 2 pieces of the gold pleather right sides facing each other, traced the pattern, pinned the pieces together, and cut it out to have 2 identical pieces. Yeah, basically after I was done with that step, I had a bunch of gold spaghetti looking pieces. I did the vines a bit differently than the stripes and hem. I secured my pieces to the fabric using tape, then went over one edge of a twig using the same zigzag stitch as before, so that the other edge would be left open. After having one edge of the vine secured, I started going over the opposite one, all the while stuffing a thin strip of batting so that it would be captured between the 2 seams. Hopefully the video footage explains this better than my babbling self. And yeah, here's one side done, almost. These took so long to complete, way longer than I initially anticipated, but I'm so glad I did them this way. Next I started with her jewelry and like hard pieces. Here I'm making her crown thingy with some jewelry components I have from AliExpress. I really like this filigree effect, it looks really fancy and authentic. Next up I opened a blender and started modeling away. This wasn't exactly hard for me because I'm a 3D artist, but it was still a lot of work because her pieces are very intricate and there's a lot of them, frankly. Here I'm making her headpiece. Hairpin, the thing that goes on the side of her head. Some of the techniques I used here include curves, arrays, subdivision modifier. Yeah, it's not exactly complicated, but like I said, very time consuming. So I didn't show you all of it, just some satisfying sped up clips, so you can enjoy all the cool parts like this spinning around and scaling the empty. Yeah, if only it was fun like that all the time. While working on this, I had a reference open all the time on a second monitor, because when doing stuff like this you have to use reference. Over here you can see that I have it underneath the thing I'm working with. This is the belt buckle. This was so many little pieces, each individually printed, but I'll worry about that later. I used Cura for my 3D slicer. I used different settings for different pieces, but each piece was treated separately and exported, which was very time consuming. Nothing fancy, I just used a brim for most of the pieces and supports where it was needed. Then my 3D printer did its job. And I could go to painting them in my very professional paint booth, which consists of 2 pizza boxes. Yes, we take our job seriously here. Then when they were all painted with a base coat, I could go ahead and glue them together with my reference open on my monitor so I knew which piece goes where. And here's the finished parts of her jewelry. I think they look really nice with the blue sparkling gems. Then I started working on her sleeve/mitten. For this I had a 3D model that I got from DeviantArt open. I extracted the texture from this part and could use it to reference my pattern. So using that I traced the vines and leaves with water-soluble marker. I don't have an embroidery machine, so for the vines I just used this thing called rat tail rope. That's a funny name. Anyway, I taped the pieces onto my drawn lines. I couldn't use sewing pins for this because they warped the rope and it came out all janky, and tape is just easier in this case. I burned each end so it wouldn't fray and secured it with tape so it wouldn't slide around while sewing it. I just peeled them off. And for the tiny leaves I just modeled tiny pieces of the rope onto a clear piece of tape. I shaped them until I was happy with the result I had, and just pasted it once again directly on my fabric. Then sewed it with the machine. This was kind of tedious because those curves are really small, so it was basically stitch, turn around, stitch, turn the fabric around. But I think it's worth it in the end. And I just peeled it off, which was also tiresome, so I used a pair of tweezers where I couldn't reach with my fat fingers. Then I started working on the embroidery along the edge of the sleeve. This is my first time doing a stitch like this, so I'd have to do some extensive research first, and apparently this is called the closed blanket stitch. For additional detail, I added a chain stitch, and this made it look pretty accurate to the reference in my opinion. Then I just filled in the little leaf parts with brown acrylic paint that matched my rope color. Added a loop for my finger to go through, and repeated all of that all again for the symmetrical piece. Then I could sew them together, and there was a finished sleeve. Yeah, looks great. Next up I worked on my skirt. For that I traced lines with water-soluble marker, 3 centimeters apart, made some pleats with my iron, finished the edges with a serger, made a tunnel for the elastic to go through. Then I hung it on my sewing mannequin and placed the lace in the spot where I want the skirt edge to go through. Then I cut underneath the lace and sewed it in place with my gold embroidery thread. At this point I was like 2 days before the shoot, so sorry, some footage is missing and really janky like in here. But here I'm making her boot covers by literally wrapping my leg in the leather fabric, drawing just onto my leg, no pattern, no mock-up, no time. That's just how it is sometimes, you know, before the shoot you just draw your pattern on yourself. I added some darts so it can have a nicer shape, like here. Cut it out, traced it to a symmetrical piece, cut that piece out, and I ended up with these 2 weird shaped pieces. Then I worked on some detailing. In this case, these are like cut out petals that go on her sides. Added more gold embroidery lines, then the gold pleather trim, and her leg warmer things were ready. For the belt I just made several triangles that I glued together, and they attach at the front. And that's it. That's my Triss cosplay. Thank you so much for watching till the end. Not gonna lie, this was a long and sometimes frustrating process, and naturally I didn't show you all my struggles and fails because that would be like an hour-long video, and let's be honest, no one wants to see that. But overall I really enjoy crafting it. I just live for that feeling when you finally put on your finished cosplay and you feel so powerful as your favorite character. So this is definitely not my last cosplay from the Witcher series. Like, just from the Wild Hunt, I was thinking of also doing Anna Henrietta in her riding/incognita outfit, so keep your eyes open for that. Please leave a comment if you have any feedback regarding like my editing, my voiceover, my filming, because this is like my first time doing a YouTube video like this and I feel like I'm kind of wandering in the dark with this whole thing. So if you're a maker yourself and have any questions regarding my making process, or would do something differently, then don't hesitate to write it down as well. I'll try to reply to all the comments. I'm still not sure if I should go down this YouTube path, so if you want to see more stuff like this, then please leave a like under this video and subscribe to this channel so I know that there's an interest in what I do here. Alright, thanks for coming on this journey with me. Take care, my friends, bye!
Myślę, że teraz miałeś kilka interakcji.
No wiem.
Znaczy, wydaje mi się, że drugie podejście było najlepsze.
Zróbmy jeszcze raz just in case. Sorry, editing Maggie.
Słychać, że piłaś energetyka przed chwilą. I to, że się zacinasz, bo wynika z tego, w sensie te wszystkie przerwy.
Hopefully